Welcome! What a great night it is to be alive. Or dead. I don't judge. But man, am I excited tonight, because I got a gem for you. Dr. Bunny and Mr. Hare are excited too. Right, guys? Jeez. Be cool. They're nice to me off camera, I swear. Now, if you've seen my video on the Devil's Chair urban legend, which I'll link up here, you'd know that I said that it was the first in a series. Well, it was during the research for that video that I came across a map of the United States showing the scariest urban legends from each state, which I'll show you right now. Did you catch it? Now you're not allowed to pause and go look. Don't ruin the surprise. Now some of these stories even I haven't heard before, and I bet you haven't either. So let's dive right into this thing together. Now one thing I've always wondered is, how did these stories start anyways? Some say even the wildest of tales have a kernel of truth at the center. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing I know for sure is this world is much bigger, older, and stranger than I could ever imagine when I was a kid. So don't be too quick to shut your eyes and tell yourself it's only a story. Because when you find yourself face to face with one of these urban legends, the myth might just become all too real.
Number 1. The Dead Children's Playground in Huntsville, Alabama. Tucked away behind the historic Maple Hill Cemetery, you'll find a depression in a natural alcove. Nestled at the bottom of the rocky hillside is a playground. It's not an overly impressive park, but it is nice in the daylight and surrounded by shady beech trees. There are swings and toddler-sized play equipment and a covered pavilion with picnic benches. Not to mention lots of kids climb some of the rock outcrops and enjoy the elevated view from the top. Now, one thing to note about Huntsville is it became the first incorporated town in Alabama in 1811. This means that the city was enjoying rapid growth thanks to the bounty of cotton fields and the strategic position along the Memphis and Charleston Railroad line. In 1900 to 1901, Lincoln Mill Village, the Merrimack Manufacturing Company, Dallas Mill, and Lowe Mill were all opened. Mill owners actively encouraged the use of children as a prime source of labor, and the Huntsville newspaper praised the mills for teaching the kids, quote, work ethics, unquote. In Alabama, almost 1 out of every 4 mill workers was a child. There were lots of accidents involving children. In 1918, the Spanish flu killed at least 50 million people worldwide. Many were children, and they all found their final resting place in Maple Hill Cemetery.
There was even a nursery rhyme taught to children about the flu. It goes,
I had a bird, her name was Enza. I opened the window in influenza.
Although the history alone is sad and morbid, it all goes a little bit deeper. People who have visited the playground, including paranormal investigators, insist that it is very haunted.
Though there is no record, urban legend says the children who died during the influenza pandemic rest in the plot near the playground and like to come and play at night. There have been a lot of reports about paranormal activity. Swings move by themselves, children run back and forth. People have heard screams and laughter. Some have even taken photos on the playground and noticed orbs and figures in the background. Some even think that the ghosts are those of several children who were abducted and then later murdered near the playground for a satanic ritual way back in 1960.
Though there is no evidence to say if that is true or not.
Number 2. The Kushtaka in southern Alaska.
Otters have got to be one of the cutest of all animals. My daughter just adores them. But what if I told you that the Tlingit people of southern Alaska and western Canada have a tale about the playful creatures that will send chills down your spine? This is the legend of the Kushtaka.
Physically, the Kushtaka are shapeshifters, capable of assuming either human form or the form of an otter. In some accounts, a Kushtaka is able to assume the form of any species of otter, in others only one. Accounts of their behavior seem to conflict with one another. In some stories, Kushtaka are cruel creatures who take delight in tricking poor Tlingit sailors to their deaths. In others, they are friendly and helpful, frequently saving the lost from death by freezing. In many stories, the Kushtaka save the lost individual by distracting them with curiously otter-like illusions of their family and friends as they transform their subject into a fellow Kushtaka, thus allowing him to survive in the cold. Naturally, this is counted a mixed blessing. However, Kushtaka legends are not always pleasant. In some legends, it is said that the Kushtaka will imitate the cries of a baby or the screams of a woman to lure victims to the river. Once there, the Kushtaka either kills the person and tears them to shreds, or will turn them into another Kushtaka. Kushtakas are also known for kidnapping human babies. Once they have the baby, they will begin the transformation process.
The function of this was probably used by Tlingit mothers to keep children from wandering too close to the ocean by themselves.
The Kushtaka are also supposedly terrified of dogs.
Alaska has plenty of furry and fearsome sled dogs to keep its villagers safe from harm. It's also said that fire may be an effective way to keep the shape-shifting otters away.
Number 3. Slaughterhouse Canyon in Kingman, Arizona. There are several variations to the Slaughterhouse Canyon legend. Although there are differences in the tales, the premise of the story is the same. The canyon where the horrific tale occurred is actually Luana's Canyon, situated just southeast of Kingman, Arizona. In the most common version of the story, a miner and his family move into a small wooden shack along a dry wash in the middle of the canyon.
The wife's name was Luana, thus the name of the canyon.
The husband wanted nothing more than to provide a better life for his wife and children. It wasn't uncommon in those days for a man to leave his family for weeks at a time and seek gold in the northwestern mountains. This miner was no different, so he ventured off into the mountains in search of gold and food for his family. One day, the miner rode off on the back of a mule and never returned. No one knows what became of him, but it is thought he was probably the victim of a robbery, an accident, or perhaps he was killed by wild animals.
Luana patiently waited for her husband's return, but he didn't, and thus they ran out of food and were starving.
Without food and unable to care for her children, Luana slowly became insane. Her children became weak and constantly begged for food, but there was none to be had. Unable to cope with watching her children slowly starve to death, she murdered them and cut them into small pieces. It is also said that she put them on her white wedding gown before committing the ghastly act. When she had finished, her white wedding gown and the walls of the tiny wooden shack were spattered with the blood of her children. Locals in Kingman call the house where the murder took place the Slaughterhouse. The woman then carried the remains of her children down to the edge of the river and tossed them in. She collapsed in a blood-soaked heap and began to wail loudly for her children. She remained on the riverbank, continuing to scream and wail until the next morning when she succumbed to starvation herself. She died mourning the children that she had murdered. According to a local resident, the wails and sobs of a heartbroken and psychotic mother can still be heard within the canyon. Those who have heard it are convinced it's more than just an urban legend.
A little side note here, but I can't help but noticing the similarities to La Llorona, and I'm sure most of you know who that is, but if you haven't, do a little search. You'll be glad you did. It's one of my favorite urban legends.
Number 4. The Dog Boy of Quitman, Arkansas.
Now, this is an interesting story that I actually have come across before, but unfortunately in this case, our source map got this one wrong. The map says a werewolf-like ghost walks on all fours and haunts his childhood home, when in fact this often misquoted urban legend says nothing about a dogman or werewolf. The reason he's called the Dog Boy of Quitman, Arkansas is something much more terrible than looking like a wolf, and something much more despicable.
Now I'd like to take a quick second to warn you guys, the next segment won't be especially graphic, but if you can't handle hearing about animal abuse, then skip ahead to the time on the screen now, or use the timestamps in the description to skip to the next urban legend on our list. At the corner of Mulberry and 3rd Street in the town of Quitman, Arkansas, there stands a house built around 1890. The owners of the house, a couple named Weaver, were experiencing odd events such as lights turning on and off on their own, sudden noises, cold spots, and the feeling that somebody else was living in the house with them. It came to a head when Tony Weaver saw a man dressed like a World War I soldier staring through the foyer into the living room. 2 years earlier, a renovator named Ed Munnerlin working in the house at night also reported seeing, quote, a large, weird-looking man with long brown hair, creepy eyes, and great big arms and hands, unquote. Holding a cat in the rear sunroom, Munnerlin reported that the man walked right in front of him, glaring, before disappearing into the hallway. Munnerlin also noted a cold wind down his back when the figure passed.
Shortly thereafter, rumors began circulating sporadically about the Dog Man of Quitman, whose piercing eyes could sometimes be spotted in the upstairs windows of the house late at night. This specter was somebody who haunted the town's past, a real piece of work named Gerald Floyd Bettis.
Gerald was born on July 23, 1953, to Floyd and Aileen Bettis. Gerald was a large and challenging child. Neighbors reported that Floyd and Aileen were good parents, but Jarrell was a malicious, demanding lout, always craving attention in inappropriate and tasteless ways. But as Jarrell grew into a teenager, his social clumsiness took a more feral turn as he began pursuing some unusual behaviors, including collecting stray cats and dogs, leading to his teasing nickname, Dog Boy. What the kids teasing him did not realize was that Jarrell was not just collecting, but torturing and killing these animals. Neighbors told reporter Lisa Armstrong in 2007 that, quote, "we could hear them howl," unquote. Around this time, the 6'4", 300-pound Bettis began physically and psychologically abusing his parents. As a teenager, he purportedly beat his father regularly and one time even threw him out of a second-story window. Although Floyd was around 67 years of age at the time, he managed to hang on to the window ledge until police came, after being called by a neighbor. He also began locking his parents upstairs for days or even weeks at a time, taking them food only when he got around to it. Jarrell inexplicably died of a drug overdose while in DOC custody on May 18, 1988, at the age of 34. He is buried in Pearson Cemetery.
And that's really all this story is about. A man who used his large size to hurt the most vulnerable around him, and the myths that surround his name greatly overshadowed the man who it came from.
Number 5. The Dark Watchers in the Santa Lucia Mountains in California. In the Santa Lucia Mountains, local legend speaks of mysterious dark figures who stand along the peaks, often in places ordinary people would not be able to climb to, and seemingly staring at nothing.
And they have been given the name the Dark Watchers.
Known to the 18th century Spanish settlers as Los Vigilantes Oscuros, they stand completely motionless as they look out to the sea, appearing to wear long black coats and broad-brimmed black hats, and occasionally spotted holding a staff or a walking stick. They have never been observed to have facial features, but that's perhaps because no one has been able to get close enough to look. Anyone who attempts to get that close has found that the figures simply vanish, leaving no footprints or any other evidence that they were there to begin with. According to legend, there are some requirements for the Dark Watchers to make themselves known to hikers in the mountains. They prefer to only reveal themselves to hikers carrying simple possessions like hats and walking sticks instead of high-tech equipment. There is one often repeated story of a local man who went hiking in the mountains sometimes in the late 1960s. He saw the Dark Watchers and somehow had enough time to study and process exactly what it was he was seeing. He called out to some fellow hikers in order to alert them of the presence of these mysterious figures, but when he turned back to where the figures had been standing, they had vanished. Naturally, the story is vague and there is nothing to indicate that this encounter took place, but it does seem to mirror the experience of others who have claimed to see the Dark Watchers. There are, of course, some people who claim that the Dark Watchers are simply the result of pareidolia, a psychological phenomenon during which the brain seeks out recognizable or familiar patterns and shapes in an otherwise alien or unclear image. A less natural explanation for the Dark Watchers links them to reports of shadow people due to their similar physical appearances, particularly the notorious Hat Man, often seen by sufferers of sleep paralysis.
Many witnesses and locals believe the Dark Watchers are spirits, though the type of spirits they are is debated.
Some say they bring bad luck. Others claim they are spirits of the more benevolent kind, likely owing to the fact that there have been no reported encounters that involve violence. Still, others claim that the Dark Watchers are physical manifestations of the Grim Reaper himself, or herself.
So what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. And this brings us to the end of part 1 of the series. We have many more states to explore and legends to cover. So if you enjoyed this video as much as I did, don't forget to like and subscribe, comment down below, and hit the bell so you can get notified as soon as my videos are released. And I just wanted to say thank you to all my new subscribers from the bottom of my heart. This is one of my personal passions, and I just hope it can be a passion of yours too. Thank you all. Good night.